You ever notice how the sound of the mail slot can either bring comfort or dread? For me, it used to be the highlight of the morning. Retirement life had slowed things down, and after 20 years of service in the Army and another 15 teaching ROTC, the simple ritual of coffee, the morning sun, and flipping through the mail felt like a reward for decades of grind. That was before the letters started. The first one looked official, too official. Bold lettering across the top read, "Notice of violation, Homeowners Association." My gut sank. I hadn't been here more than 3 months, still the new guy on the block. I had bought this modest 2-bedroom in a Texas suburb because it seemed peaceful, quiet, and the neighbors looked decent enough. A little brick ranch house with a flagpole out front, a trimmed lawn, and an old pecan tree shading the porch. The kind of place you picture when you think of winding down your life in peace. Inside the envelope, though, was a list of sins I apparently committed against the almighty HOA. Grass exceeding height requirements, mailbox paint chipping, unauthorized flagpole installation. Unauthorized flagpole? I shook my head and let out a laugh that was more bitter than amused. That pole had flown the American flag with me on bases across 3 continents. Now some paper-pushing committee thought they could tell me it wasn't aesthetic. I called my daughter that evening. She lives about 30 minutes away, busy raising 2 kids of her own, but she knows when my voice carries that quiet tension. "Dad, don't let them get under your skin," she said. "It's just a letter." Just a letter. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first of 37. 37 violation notices in the span of 4 months. The second letter said I had left my garbage cans out an extra day. The third claimed the pecan tree dropped too many leaves into the street. I'm not joking, too many leaves. By the 10th notice, the fines started showing up. 100 here, 200 there. By the 20th, the threats escalated talk of liens and even foreclosure if I didn't comply. Pause right here and imagine this with me. You've worked your whole life, followed the law, raised your kids, served your country, paid your taxes, and some committee of self-elected busybodies thinks they can take your home because a tree dared to shed its leaves. If that makes your blood pressure spike, smash that like button right now. Now, let me tell you about the face of this circus. Her name was Karen. Yes, really. Ho President Karen. She wore that title like it made her mayor of Texas. Sharp bob haircut, clipboard always in hand, and a smile that never reached her eyes. She would strut around the cul-de-sac in her khakis, jotting down infractions as if she were some law enforcement officer. My first real conversation with her was when she knocked on my door after violation letter number 5. "Mr. Harris," she said, without even waiting to be invited in, "your shutters are non-compliant. The shade of green is not on the approved palette. You'll need to repaint." I looked over at those shutters, perfectly fine, sturdy, painted just last year by the previous owner. "I'm a retired soldier, ma'am," I told her, keeping my voice calm. "I fought in places where buildings were rubble. Trust me, those shutters are just fine." She clicked her pen, unimpressed. "We have standards. If you can't follow them, maybe this community isn't the right fit for you." That line stuck with me. Maybe this community isn't the right fit. Like she owned the ground beneath my feet. The funny thing was, most of the neighbors weren't like her. The older couple across the street always waved when I watered the lawn. A young family 2 doors down brought me banana bread when I moved in. Even the widower next door, quiet guy named Frank, once offered to help me trim the pecan tree. But everyone lowered their voices whenever Karen's name came up, like she was some kind of neighborhood overlord. By the time letter number 15 hit, I started keeping a binder. Old soldier habits die hard. Documentation is ammunition. Each notice went into a plastic sleeve. Dates, photos, my own notes. Grass trimmed day prior. Violation baseless. Trash cans inside garage at 6:00 p.m. Proof, time-stamped photo. I wasn't planning on war yet. I was just readying myself. The tipping point came on a Thursday in early spring. I had just finished mowing, sweat still dripping down my back, when a certified letter arrived. Inside, bold as day, final warning. Failure to comply will result in foreclosure proceedings. They were really threatening to take my house. My house. The one I paid cash for after years of saving. I sat there at the kitchen table with that letter, staring at the words until they blurred. My wife had passed 5 years earlier, and this house was supposed to be my sanctuary, the place my grandkids could visit, where I could finally breathe. And now, some HOA Karen wanted to strip it away because she didn't like the paint on my shutters. I felt my hands tighten into fists. And then something shifted. It wasn't despair anymore, it was resolve. They thought I was just another retiree who would roll over. They didn't know I'd spent half my life studying rules of engagement, strategy, and discipline. They didn't know I kept meticulous records. They didn't know that under this quiet, gray-haired exterior was a man who'd faced down far worse enemies than a suburban HOA board. So, I did what any soldier does when under fire. I started planning my counterattack. First, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, an old student of mine from my teaching years, now a rising star in real estate law. I explained everything, and when I mentioned 37 violation letters, he whistled. "Sir," he said, "that's harassment. Let's build a case." That night, binders spread across my dining table. I felt the fire in my chest again. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one under attack, I was laying the groundwork for my own offensive. What came next? Oh, you won't believe the way this Karen's smug little empire began to unravel. But I'll save that for the next chapter. Before I end, let me ask you, if your HOA sent you 37 violation letters, would you fight back? Or just pay up and hope they stop? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your stories too. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see how this suburban justice tale plays out. Because trust me, the best part is still to come. The binder. That old army green 3-ring binder became my weapon of choice. Funny how in my years overseas, my weapons were steel and lead. Now in this Texas suburb, it was laminated paper and ink. Every violation letter was a bullet they'd fired at me, and I was catching each one, carefully loading them back into the chamber. My lawyer, Daniel, came over one Saturday afternoon. I had called him on a whim, but when he heard the edge in my voice, he offered to drive down. When he walked into my kitchen and saw the binder stretched across the table like a battlefield map, his eyebrows shot up. "Sir," he said, flipping through the pages, "you've basically done my job for me. Photos, timestamps, certified mail receipts, this is evidence gold." I smirked. "Attention to detail wins battles, son." He grinned, shaking his head. Karen and her board don't know what's about to hit them. Now, I want you to imagine this moment, because this is one of those fantasy wins a lot of us homeowners dream of. The HOA thinks they're holding all the power, waving fines and foreclosure threats like weapons. But the truth? They're sloppy. They get greedy. And when someone finally pushes back with facts, the whole empire starts to crumble. But before the lawsuit could be filed, we needed one more thing, a pattern of intent. It wasn't enough to show I got 37 letters. We had to prove they were targeting me unfairly, singling me out. Enter Frank, my quiet next-door neighbor. I caught him one evening while taking out the trash. "Frank," I said, lowering my voice, "do you ever get violation letters?" He chuckled bitterly. "Not once, and my siding hasn't been painted in 10 years. Don't tell Karen." That was it, the crack in the wall. I asked around carefully over the next week. The young family with the banana bread, no letters. The retired couple with weeds in their flower bed, no letters. Turns out I was the only one getting bombarded. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was waging a personal war. Why me? Maybe it was the flagpole. Maybe she didn't like the way I pushed back when she first knocked on my door. Or maybe some people just need a target and I was convenient. Pause a second here. Have you ever felt singled out by a boss, a neighbor, or yes, an HOA board? Like no matter what you did, they were waiting to pounce? If you know that feeling, leave a comment right now. I want to see how many of us have been there. Anyway, the evidence mounted. Daniel drew up the complaint: harassment, abuse of power, and violation of Texas property law. We weren't just asking the court to toss out the fines, we were asking for damages. And here's where the first big twist hit. The day after the lawsuit was filed, Karen herself showed up at my door, clipboard in hand, but this time her hands were trembling ever so slightly. "Mr. Harris," she said, voice clipped, "I received notice of your action. This is a misunderstanding. If you'd like, we can discuss a settlement outside of court. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Karen, I've received 37 letters in 4 months. You threatened to take my home. You think this is a misunderstanding? Her smile faltered, just for a second. The HOA has rights, and so do I. I cut in. And a judge is about to remind you of that. She huffed and turned on her heel, marching back down my driveway like a general retreating from battle. But as she left, she called out, "You'll regret this." Now, normally I'd brush that off. But the way she said it? Cold, confident, almost gleeful. It gnawed at me. Sure enough, within a week, the HOA doubled down. New violation notices, backdated, claiming my fence was too tall, my porch light too bright, even that my grandkids' chalk drawings on the driveway were graffiti. They were escalating, retaliating. Exactly what my lawyer hoped they'd do, because retaliation made our case bulletproof. Daniel almost laughed when I brought him the stack. "They're hanging themselves with their own rope," he said. Still, living under daily attack takes a toll. I'd wake up each morning dreading that trip to the mailbox. My daughter noticed the weight in my voice and came by with the kids one Saturday. "Dad," she said, putting her hand on mine, "don't let them steal your peace. This is your home." And that's when I realized something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure no other family, no other retiree, no other soldier who sacrificed for this country would ever feel threatened in their own house by a group of clipboard tyrants. So, I made a decision. I wouldn't settle. Even if they offered to drop the fines, even if they begged. I wanted this in open court, with a record that could be quoted the next time an HOA tried to overstep. Of course, I wasn't the only one watching the drama unfold. Neighbors began whispering, some emboldened by my stand. The older couple across the street slipped me a note in my mailbox. "Thank you for fighting back. We've been too scared to speak." Another twist came a week later. Local news caught wind. A reporter rang my bell asking about allegations of HOA harassment. Apparently, someone had tipped them off. Maybe one of my supportive neighbors, maybe Daniel himself. Either way, I wasn't shy. "You want a quote?" I said into the camera. "A homeowners association exists to protect the community, not terrorize it. They sent me 37 violation letters. I sent them one lawsuit. Let's see whose paper carries more weight." That clip aired on the evening news. And oh, you should have seen Karen's face at the next board meeting when half the neighborhood turned up, arms crossed, watching her squirm under the lights. But the real battle was still ahead. Court was scheduled in 6 weeks. Karen and her cronies would lawyer up. They'd dig for dirt. They'd try to paint me as the problem. What they didn't know was that the binder wasn't my only weapon. I had one more piece of evidence, something they never expected. But that, my friends, is where I'll leave you hanging tonight. So here's my question for you. If you were in my shoes, would you take the settlement and walk away? Or push for a public showdown in court? Drop your answer below. I read every one. And if you want to see what happens when a so-called HOA powerhouse gets dragged before a judge, make sure you're subscribed. Because trust me, the best revenge story hasn't even started yet. The day I pulled out my secret weapon was the first day I actually felt the tide turning. See, the binder was strong, bulletproof even, but buried in all those violation notices, photos, and timestamps, I had one piece of evidence that could cut through any lawyer's spin. Something that would show without question that Karen and her board weren't just enforcing rules, they were targeting me and lying to do it. It started with my security cameras. Old Army habit, I like to know what's happening around my perimeter. I'd installed 2 simple cameras, one facing the driveway and one aimed at the porch. Mostly, they captured squirrels raiding the pecan tree and my grandkids drawing chalk hopscotch on the sidewalk. But one night, while going through footage, I found something else. Karen. At 10:47 p.m., under the dim glow of the streetlight, she was walking right up to my mailbox. She opened it, slipped in an envelope, and then this is the kicker. She pulled out a folded paper from her clipboard, wrote something down, and left. She wasn't mailing the violation letters, she was planting them, and recording her own false proof at the same time. When I showed Daniel the footage, his eyes lit up. "This is it," he said. "This isn't just harassment, this is fraud." Pause here for a moment. Imagine the HOA Karen in your neighborhood getting caught red-handed, on camera, planting fake violations against you. Picture the look on her face when that video plays in a courtroom. That's the moment we all live for in HOA revenge stories. If you're smiling just imagining it, hit that like button. But before we could get there, we had to survive the buildup. Court was weeks away, and Karen wasn't letting up. She doubled the fines again, sent certified threats, even posted a notice on my front door that read, "Foreclosure pending." I remember ripping that notice off, my hands shaking. For a split second, fear tried to creep in. They really wanted me gone. They were willing to humiliate me publicly, make my neighbors think I was about to lose everything. But then I remembered the footage, and the binder, and Daniel's words, "They're hanging themselves with their own rope." So I straightened my shoulders, stuck that foreclosure notice in a plastic sleeve, and slid it into the binder. Evidence, not defeat. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the neighborhood. People were tired of Karen's reign, but fear kept them quiet. That changed when I decided to host a little gathering in my backyard one Saturday. Nothing formal, just burgers on the grill, lawn chairs, and a cooler of iced tea. About 20 neighbors came, curious, cautious. I stood up by the pecan tree, binder in hand, and said, "I'm not asking anyone to fight my battle, but if you've ever felt harassed or threatened by this HOA, now's the time to speak." One by one, they did. The retired couple admitted Karen threatened them with a fine over their bird bath. The young mom said Karen told her kids couldn't ride bikes on the sidewalk. Frank, usually silent, said he once got a warning for having his truck parked in his driveway, while another board member's son parked his RV there for weeks without issue. It all poured out, like a dam breaking. And for the first time, the neighbors weren't whispering, they were speaking openly, looking around at each other with nods of agreement. Unity. That's what Karen had never expected. Someone asked, "What can we do?" Daniel, who joined us, spoke up. "You can sign affidavits, statements about what you've experienced. The more accounts we have, the stronger the case." And they did. Right there, people lined up at my patio table, pens in hand, writing their stories. By the end of the night, I had a stack of signed affidavits to add to the binder. Karen's empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. Still, I knew better than to underestimate an enemy. Karen had allies on the board, and rumor was they'd hired a sharp attorney from downtown. She was going to fight tooth and nail. Sure enough, the first pretrial hearing came, and Karen strutted into that courtroom in a navy blue suit, chin high, board members trailing behind her like bodyguards. She didn't look nervous. She looked smug. Their lawyer argued I was non-compliant, disruptive, and antagonistic. He said I ignored repeated warnings. He painted me as a problem child in the neighborhood. Daniel stood, calm as could be, binder in hand. "Your Honor, we have 37 violation notices, every one of which is baseless, retaliatory, or fabricated. And we can prove it." He clicked the screen, and the footage rolled. There was Karen, caught at 10:47 p.m., slipping the envelope into my mailbox. The courtroom went still. You could practically hear the oxygen leave her lungs. Karen's face flushed red, her jaw tightening. She whispered something harsh to her lawyer, who tried to object, but it was too late. The judge had seen it. That was the first real blow. Not the knockout yet, but the kind of punch that staggers an opponent, makes them realize the fight isn't going their way. After the hearing, outside on the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed again. One stuck a mic in my face. "Mr. Harris, do you believe the HOA targeted you personally?" I looked right into the camera. "I don't just believe it, I proved it. This isn't about me anymore. This is about every homeowner who's been bullied into silence." If you've ever wondered how to fight unfair HOA rules, the answer is simple. Document everything and don't be afraid to stand up. That clip went viral online. Views skyrocketed. Comments poured in, people sharing their own HOA revenge stories, cheering me on, demanding justice. And that's when Karen made her biggest mistake yet. Instead of laying low, instead of trying to negotiate, she called an emergency HOA meeting. She stood there in front of the whole neighborhood and declared, "Mr. Harris is trying to destroy our community with lies. He's exploiting the legal system. And if he wins, our property values will plummet." Her voice shook with anger, but for the first time, I noticed something new in the crowd. People weren't nodding, they weren't clapping, they were frowning, whispering, shaking their heads. She had overplayed her hand. And I knew, standing there at the back of the room, binder in my arms, that the real battle, the climax, was coming fast. But you'll have to wait for that, because in Chapter 4, I'll tell you exactly how Karen's empire began to collapse from the inside out, and the twist that even I didn't see coming. Before I go, let me ask you this. Do you think Karen should step down after being caught on video? Or should she keep digging her own grave in court? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I guarantee this will split opinions. And remember, if this HOA drama makes you mad, smash that like button so more people see how these suburban tyrants get taken down. The suburban justice tale isn't finished yet, not even close. The moment that video of Karen planting violation letters played in court, everything shifted. It wasn't just a piece of evidence, it was a bomb dropped right into the heart of her little empire. She didn't show it on her face, not fully, but I could tell. Her lips pressed thin, her shoulders tight, her pen tapping faster than a Morse code signal. She knew she'd been caught, and worse, she knew the neighborhood had seen it. The funny thing about tyrants is they always believe their power is absolute until it isn't. And once the first crack shows, the whole foundation starts to give way. The HOA board had always moved as a pack, parroting Karen's words, nodding when she scolded, signing whatever papers she thrust at them. But at the next board meeting after that court session, something new happened. One of the members, Doug, a middle-aged guy who'd been living in the subdivision longer than Karen, cleared his throat mid-meeting and said, "Karen, maybe we need to reconsider how we're handling things." You could have heard a pin drop. Karen snapped her head toward him like a hawk spotting prey. "Reconsider? Doug, we're protecting the community." Doug shifted in his chair. Protecting is one thing. Fabricating violations is another. That video doesn't lie. Murmurs rippled across the room. For the first time, people weren't scared to talk. I sat in the back, arms folded, letting the silence stretch. Another board member, a woman named Elaine, chimed in softly. "Maybe we should pause enforcement until this case is resolved, just to show good faith." Karen slammed her clipboard onto the table. "Good faith? He's suing us." She jabbed her finger in my direction, though she wouldn't quite look me in the eye. "If we back down now, we lose everything." That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just worried about fines or property values. She was worried about losing control. This wasn't about shutters or mailboxes or lawns, it was about her throne, the tiny kingdom she'd built where she was queen of the cul-de-sac. The neighbors weren't buying it anymore. Heads shook, arms crossed. And when the meeting adjourned, instead of rushing out, people lingered talking to me, to Daniel, to each other. One man leaned over and whispered, "We've wanted her gone for years. We just didn't think anyone could beat her." It reminded me of something I'd seen overseas. Villages held hostage by warlords, people too afraid to resist until one person showed they could. Fear loses its grip the moment courage takes its place. Of course, Karen didn't retreat. She went on the offensive again, but this time, it wasn't just me she targeted, it was anyone who spoke out. Doug got a letter about improper trash disposal. Elaine got cited for unapproved garden decorations. Even the family with banana bread received a violation for leaving sidewalk chalk too long. It was so blatant it almost felt comical, like a parody of an HOA Karen meltdown. But every one of those notices just became more ammo for the case. Retaliation, retaliation, retaliation. Daniel said to me over coffee one morning, "She's unraveling. People like this always do. The more they feel control slipping, the harder they squeeze, until it all breaks." And break it did. The twist came 2 weeks before the trial. Elaine, the quiet board member, called me at dusk. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Harris," she said, "I don't agree with what's happening. Karen forced us to sign off on violations we didn't even review. She would draft them, shove them in front of us at meetings, and threaten to remove us from the board if we didn't comply. I can testify." I nearly dropped the phone. A board member flipping sides was the kind of inside blow Karen would never recover from. Elaine wasn't just a witness, she was an insider exposing the machinery of the HOA. When I told Daniel, he practically leapt out of his chair. This seals it. Fraud, abuse of authority, board coercion, we're not just going to win, we're going to dismantle them. It was surreal, watching Karen's iron grip turn to sand. She'd strutted for so long, certain everyone bowed to her clipboard. Now her own allies were defecting, neighbors were uniting, and the courts were circling. But she wasn't done lashing out. A week before trial, I woke up to find my fence spray-painted with the words, HOA traitor. My gut told me who was behind it, though of course she'd never admit it. I installed another camera, filed another police report, and added it to the binder. Harassment wasn't just continuing, it was escalating. Neighbors rallied. They came over with paint, brushes, and good humor, covering the graffiti in a fresh coat before sunset. Standing there, surrounded by people I'd barely known 6 months earlier, I felt something bigger than revenge stirring. This was community. This was what HOAs were supposed to be, about neighbors, helping neighbors, not rulers punishing subjects. And it hit me that Karen had already lost, even before the trial. She might have fines, threats, and lawyers, but I had something she'd never touch again: the respect and trust of the people living here. Still, I wanted the final blow, the courtroom victory, the judge's gavel, the poetic justice of watching her empire crumble in black and white on the record. And that day was almost here. Daniel said it best the night before trial. Tomorrow, we don't just beat her, we set a precedent. Every homeowner who's been bullied will see this case and know they can fight back. I looked at that binder one last time, the weight of it heavy in my hands. 37 violation letters, affidavits, photos, security footage, police reports, sworn testimony from her own board member. Karen thought she was burying me with paper. Turns out, I was building her coffin with it. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, throwing long shadows across the rows of benches where neighbors, reporters, and board members sat shoulder to shoulder. It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a spectacle. I walked in with Daniel by my side, binder tucked under his arm like a soldier carrying the flag into battle. My stomach fluttered with nerves, I won't lie, but beneath that, there was a steady calm. The kind you get before a mission, when you know the plan, you've prepared, and all that's left is execution. Across the aisle, Karen sat rigid in her navy blue suit, lips pursed so tight they nearly disappeared. Her lawyer shuffled papers with nervous energy, and the rest of the board huddled behind her, looking less like allies and more like captives dragged along for the ride. The judge entered, robes swishing, and the room rose to its feet. When we sat, the trial began. Karen's lawyer went first, painting me as a chronic rule breaker. He described me as combative, uncooperative, and disrespectful of community standards. He even waved a stack of papers, my 37 violation notices, as if they were gospel truth. For a few minutes, I felt that old twinge of worry. Would people buy into it? Would they see me as some cranky retiree stirring up drama? Then, Daniel stood, calm, deliberate, every movement measured. He opened the binder and held up the very same stack of violation letters. These notices, he said, voice carrying strong and steady, are not evidence of misconduct. They are evidence of harassment. 37 notices in 4 months, most of them baseless, retaliatory, or outright fabricated. He clicked the remote and the screen lit up with the footage. There was Karen, caught at 10:47 p.m., slipping an envelope into my mailbox. The courtroom gasped. Even the judge's brows arched. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel said, "this is not enforcement of community standards. This is a targeted campaign. This is fraud." Karen's lawyer leapt up, objecting, sputtering about, taken out of context. The judge overruled. Daniel wasn't done. He called Elaine, the soft-spoken board member, to the stand. She walked up nervously, but once she started talking, her words poured out. Karen would draft violation notices before we even held meetings. She pressured us to sign without review. If we hesitated, she threatened to remove us from the board. We were not enforcing rules, we were rubber-stamping her vendetta. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Karen's face turned crimson, her pen snapping in her hand. Next, came the affidavits from neighbors, each one telling their story of intimidation and petty harassment. The family with the chalk drawings, the retired couple with the bird bath, Doug with his truck. Every account painted the same picture: selective enforcement, abuse of power, Karen lording her clipboard over the block like a crown. By the time Daniel rested our case, the weight of evidence was staggering. Karen's lawyer tried to recover, calling her to the stand. She walked up stiffly, back straight, eyes blazing. "Mrs. Reynolds," the lawyer began, "were you acting in the best interests of the community?" "Yes," she said, voice sharp. "Standards protect property values. Without them, neighborhoods fall apart. I was doing my duty." "And the video of you placing letters into Mr. Harris's mailbox?" She swallowed hard. I was simply ensuring delivery. The Postal Service can be unreliable." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. The judge rapped his gavel. Daniel rose for cross-examination. "Mrs. Reynolds, did you ever receive approval from the board to issue 37 violation letters to one homeowner in 4 months?" Her jaw tightened. "It was within my authority." "So, that's a no?" She glared at him, silent. "Did you ever falsify evidence or backdate notices to justify escalating fines?" "I followed procedure," she snapped. Daniel smiled slightly. "And yet your own board member testified under oath that you drafted letters before meetings and coerced signatures. Are you saying she's lying?" Karen's lips trembled. She misunderstood. At that moment, I realized something profound. Karen wasn't just losing the case, she was losing the illusion of control she'd wielded for years. Without fear, her authority was paper-thin. The trial lasted 2 days. By the end, the judge delivered a ruling that echoed like a victory bell. The court finds the HOA, under the leadership of Mrs. Reynolds, engaged in harassment, selective enforcement, and fraudulent practices. All fines and foreclosure actions against Mr. Trimestow Harris are null and void. Furthermore, the HOA is ordered to pay damages and attorney's fees. Mrs. Reynolds is hereby removed from her position as president, effective immediately. For a moment, silence. Then a cheer erupted from the benches where neighbors sat. Cameras flashed. The sound of reporters calling out questions filled the room. Karen sat frozen, her face pale, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Slowly, she stood, gathered her papers, and walked out without a word. The board members didn't follow. They stayed behind, shoulders slumped, as if they'd been unshackled. I stood there, binder in my hands, feeling 20 pounds lighter. Not just because I'd won, but because the neighborhood had won. The bully was gone. Reporters swarmed me outside on the steps. "Mr. Harris, how does it feel to defeat your HOA?" I looked straight into the cameras. This wasn't just my victory. This was a victory for every homeowner who's ever been bullied by unfair HOA rules. If you're watching this, remember, document everything. Know your rights, and don't let fear keep you silent. The clip spread online just like before, fueling more HOA revenge stories, more suburban justice tales. People across the country shared their own battles, their own victories. That night, neighbors gathered in my backyard again. This time, it wasn't just burgers, it was a celebration. Someone brought a cake with "Justice Served" written in frosting. Kids ran around laughing, chalking bright colors all over the driveway without a care. Doug raised a toast to Harris for standing up when the rest of us were too scared, and to a new beginning for this neighborhood. Everyone clapped. I just smiled, humbled, looking at the community around me, the same one Karen had tried to fracture, now standing united. And I'll never forget Frank, the quiet widower next door, who leaned over and whispered, "You didn't just fight for your home, you fought for all of us." He was right. The days following the trial felt like a breath of fresh air. The tension that had once hung over our neighborhood like storm clouds finally lifted. People walked their dogs without glancing nervously over their shoulders. Kids drew hopscotch squares in the street again, their laughter echoing down the cul-de-sac. For the first time in months, life here felt normal, peaceful. Karen, though, well, she disappeared. Her house, once the hub of HOA Command Central, stood oddly quiet. No clipboard, no minivan parked across my driveway, no midnight prowling with envelopes. Some neighbors said they saw her leaving with boxes. Others whispered she had moved in with her sister out of state. No one really knew for sure, and honestly, no one cared anymore. At the next HOA meeting, our first without her, I almost didn't recognize the room. Elaine sat at the head of the table, tentative but hopeful. The board seemed human again. They apologized, openly, to everyone they had wronged. For the first time, it felt like a real community gathering, not a courtroom. One neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, spoke up with tears in her eyes. "I've lived here 30 years. I thought this was going to be my last home. Under Karen, I hated it. But tonight, I feel like I belong again." It hit me hard, because that's what this fight had always been about. Not just a mailbox, not just fines, not even just my house. It was about dignity, about a group of people refusing to live under the thumb of fear. Later that night, sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea, I looked out at the street. Porch lights glowed warmly. Families sat outside talking again, reconnecting. We weren't just neighbors anymore, we were survivors who had pulled each other through something dark. And as I sat there, I thought about you. Yes, you, the one listening to this story right now. Have you ever faced someone like Karen? A person who thought power gave them the right to bully others? If you were in my shoes, would you have fought back? Or stayed quiet to avoid trouble? Do you think HOAs do more harm than good in communities? I want to hear your thoughts. Share your story down in the comments. And if you've been enjoying these HOA revenge stories, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to the HOA Stories channel so you don't miss the next tale of justice served. Because trust me, this isn't the last HOA tyrant to fall. The first few weeks after Karen's departure were quiet, almost eerily so. I kept expecting some small act of retaliation, a scribbled note on the mailbox, a neighborly complaint, maybe even another violation letter from someone still loyal to her, but nothing came. Instead, the community slowly began to heal, piece by piece. The first sign of real change was at the corner lot, the house that had always looked abandoned. Under Karen's reign, the yard had been unkempt, the porch light broken, and weeds strangling every flower bed. One Saturday morning, I noticed Doug, the longtime neighbor, hauling bags of mulch and fertilizer across the lawn. He waved, smiling sheepishly. "I figured if anyone deserves a fresh start, it's this neighborhood," he said. "Besides, it feels good to actually do something nice for a change." I nodded, feeling the weight of months of tension start to lift. Small gestures matter. Sometimes it's the mulch in the flower bed or the freshly mowed lawn that signals the return of normalcy. Word spread, and neighbors started showing up in little bursts, pruning, planting, painting. Families who had once avoided each other now talked on the sidewalks. Kids who had tiptoed around chalk drawings were back to drawing hopscotch and colorful murals. Laughter returned, echoing across driveways that had long been tense with fear. Even Frank, my quiet next-door neighbor, stepped out from behind his hedge. "I didn't think I'd ever say this," he admitted, "but I missed having a real neighborhood. I missed knowing people cared." It struck me how much Karen's reign had distorted our sense of home. The fines, the threats, the constant emails. It wasn't just harassment. It was isolation. She had kept us divided. And now that division was gone. Then came an unexpected twist. Elaine, the former board member who had testified against Karen, suggested a neighborhood meeting. Not a board meeting, not a court-style gathering, but an open forum where residents could speak about concerns, share ideas, and restore trust. We organized it on the weekend, right at the community park, under the shade of the old pecan tree. Families brought lawn chairs, iced tea, and snacks. Kids ran around, squealing as if the dark months had never existed. I took a deep breath and addressed the group. "We've been through a lot," I said, my voice carrying across the park. "But now we have a chance to build something better. Not rules that terrify, not fines that threaten, but a neighborhood where people can feel safe, respected, and heard." Hands shot up. Voices joined in. Stories poured out, small grievances, unspoken frustrations, moments of fear under Karen's thumb. And as the discussion grew, something incredible happened. Solutions appeared. Some residents volunteered to form a neighborhood watch, not to police each other, but to ensure everyone felt safe. Others suggested a committee to review and approve landscaping, decorations, and improvements democratically, with transparency and fairness. One neighbor even proposed a rotating community spotlight, recognizing small acts of kindness like helping an elderly resident carry groceries or planting flowers in shared spaces. I realized, sitting there, listening to these voices, that this was exactly what we'd been missing. Karen hadn't just abused power, she had destroyed communication. Now, for the first time in years, we were talking, planning, and laughing together. Later that evening, I walked the street and noticed the subtle but powerful changes. Mailboxes that had once been perfect replicas, rigidly uniform, now sported unique touches, painted stripes, tiny flags, cheerful designs. Lawns weren't just trimmed to a standard height. They reflected the personality of the family tending them. Even the older couple across the street, who had once shied away from any interaction, waved as I passed. "Thank you for standing up," Mrs. Jenkins said softly. "You gave us all courage." And I realized something important. Winning the lawsuit wasn't enough. True victory came when the fear dissipated, when trust was restored, when neighbors looked at each other, not with suspicion, but with understanding. Of course, not everything was perfect. Karen's shadow lingered in small ways. Rumors circulated that she might be attempting to influence HOA boards elsewhere, that she had a knack for spreading fear wherever she went. But now, fortified by evidence, community unity, and our shared experience, we felt prepared for whatever she might attempt. Daniel reminded me that night as we reviewed the case one last time, the law gave you the win, but the neighborhood gave you the peace. That's far more important. I nodded, thinking about the months of tension, the letters, the threats, and the stress that had nearly broken me. All of it had led here to a place where families could sit on their porches without fear, where children could play in the streets, and where neighbors actually felt like neighbors again. Before I close this chapter, I want to ask you, the viewer, have you ever been bullied by a person or institution in your own community? If you had the chance to stand up like I did, would you? Why or why not? What steps do you take to make your own neighborhood feel safe and united? If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who's lived under HOA stress, and subscribe to the HOA Stories channel for more real-life suburban justice tales. Because here's the truth. Justice isn't just about winning in court. It's about reclaiming your home, your peace, and your community. I thought it was over. After the lawsuit, after the community forum, after seeing the neighbors laugh and rebuild their trust, I believed Karen was gone for good. But tyrants rarely disappear quietly. They cling to power like ivy clings to a wall, choking, twisting, desperate to stay alive. It started subtly. An envelope tucked into my mailbox one Friday morning. No return address, no postmark. Just my name scrawled in jagged handwriting across the front. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 5 words, "This isn't over, watch me." I stood in my kitchen holding that note, the sunlight spilling across the counter, and for the first time since the trial ended, my stomach knotted. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was nothing, just a bitter neighbor loyal to Karen, someone who hated seeing her fall. But the following week, the whispers began. Mrs. Jenkins mentioned at our evening walk, I heard Karen's trying to run for a board position in another HOA, just one town over. Doug, while loading groceries into his car, muttered, "Saw her last week in the hardware store. She was buying thick binders, legal pads, the whole kit, looked determined." Elaine, who had risked everything to testify, called me late one night. Her voice trembled. "She's filing appeals. She wants to overturn the judgment, make it look like you harassed her. She's spinning the narrative." Karen was back in the game. The neighborhood felt it too. That slow, creeping unease we thought we had banished returned like a faint, toxic fog. Conversations grew hushed again. Porch lights that had been proudly lit after dark now flicked off earlier. Even the kids played closer to home. I knew I had a choice. Ignore Karen and hope she vanished, or confront her head on again. And I had already learned the hard way, bullies don't stop until you stop them. So I began to dig. Daniel, ever the strategist, reminded me, Karen thrives in silence. She counts on people being too afraid, too tired to keep fighting. If she's really trying to worm her way back into power, you need to expose her before she gets her claws in again. That's when we uncovered something big. Through public records, we found Karen had filed incorporation paperwork for a Neighborhood Integrity Council, a shady HOA-like group that wasn't even tied to our community. It was essentially a shell organization, one she could use to harass new homeowners, impose fees, and present herself as an authority. It was absurd, almost laughable. But knowing Karen, absurdity was her specialty. I decided to make her plans public. At our next community meeting, under the same pecan tree where we had begun to rebuild, I stood up with a folder in my hand. "Karen hasn't stopped," I said, my voice steady but filled with urgency. "She's trying to start her own version of the HOA outside the law. She's filing appeals against the judgment. She wants control again, not just here, but in other neighborhoods." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People looked at each other, fear creeping back. That's when I held up the evidence. "This is her filing. These are her appeals. These are her signatures. She's not done with us, not by a long shot." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then, something remarkable happened. Doug raised his hand. "Then, we'll fight her again. Together." Mrs. Jenkins added, "She can't control us unless we let her." Elaine stood up, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "If Karen wants war, she'll have to face all of us, not just one neighbor." It hit me like a lightning bolt. Karen had used fear as her weapon, but now we had unity. And unity was far stronger. The very next day, neighbors began documenting again, not in fear, but in vigilance. Every suspicious flyer, every strange note, every rumor of Karen's counsel was logged and reported. Daniel prepared a counter-motion, making it impossible for her appeal to sneak through unnoticed. We even created a neighborhood newsletter, not a legalistic HOA bulletin, but a simple, cheerful flyer celebrating community projects, birthdays, small victories. On the back, we included updates on Karen's antics, not to scare people, but to remind them, we are watching, we are ready, and we are not afraid. Karen tried to push back. She showed up once at the edge of the park during a weekend cookout, sunglasses covering her eyes, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Conversation stopped for a moment, but instead of shrinking, the neighbors rose. Doug walked right up to her and said, "You're not welcome here anymore. This isn't your neighborhood to control." She sneered, muttered something under her breath, and stormed off. That was the last time we saw her in person. Still, the war wasn't over. Court dates loomed, paperwork flew. Karen kept scratching, clawing, trying to find a foothold. But here's the truth. She was weaker now. She wasn't facing one frightened homeowner anymore. She was facing a united community. And unity, once awakened, is nearly impossible to break. That night, sitting on my porch, I looked at the note she had sent me, the one that said, "This isn't over. Watch me." I smiled faintly. She was right. It wasn't over. But this time, we were the ones watching her. Let me ask you, dear viewers, have you ever seen someone in your life try to regain control even after they were defeated? Do you believe people like Karen can truly change? Or do they just look for new ways to manipulate? What would you do if you knew a bully was trying to rise again in your own community? If this story gripped you, please like this video, share it with someone who's faced HOA drama, and subscribe to the HOA Stories channel so you don't miss the next chapter of Karen's downfall. Because trust me, her final act is still coming, and it will be unforgettable. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust, like a place where thousands of battles had already been fought and won, where truth and lies clashed under the hum of fluorescent lights. I sat there in the stiff wooden bench, my palms pressed together, while Karen, the woman who had made my dream home feel like a nightmare, walked in with her entourage of lawyers. She looked different this time, not weaker exactly, but older. Her hair, once perfectly styled into that HOA president helmet cut, now hung limp, streaked with silver. Her face was hard, but beneath her sunglasses, I saw the faintest trace of weariness. And yet, she still radiated that same dangerous arrogance, the belief that rules were tools she could bend at will. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with sharp glasses, called the room to order. This wasn't the original lawsuit. This was Karen's appeal. Her last desperate attempt to claw her way back into power. Daniel leaned toward me and whispered, "Stay calm. She's going to play the victim. She'll twist everything. But we've got the facts, and we've got the community. That's something she'll never understand." And twist she did. Karen's attorney painted her as the real victim, an upstanding woman, unjustly targeted by bitter neighbors. They claimed she was only enforcing the bylaws to preserve neighborhood integrity. They said she was subjected to harassment campaigns, lies, and even stalking. Every word was designed to flip the truth on its head. And as I sat there, listening, part of me trembled. What if the judge believed them? What if all our work, all our nights of stress and fear, were erased with a single ruling? Then it was Daniel's turn. He stood tall, his voice steady as he laid out the evidence, the fines, the fraudulent bylaws Karen had invented, the attempt to foreclose on my home without due process, the intimidation of witnesses like Elaine. Piece by piece, he dismantled the narrative Karen's side had spun. But the moment that broke the room came when Elaine herself took the stand. She clutched her notes with trembling hands, her voice cracking at first. I didn't want to testify. I was scared. Karen has power over people. She knows how to make you feel like you'll lose everything if you go against her." She paused, tears pooling in her eyes. Then she lifted her chin. "But I'm not scared anymore. She tried to fine me for planting roses. Roses! My husband died 2 years ago, and those flowers were his gift to me every spring. And she wanted to take that away." The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the stenographer's keys. Even Karen's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Elaine continued, her voice gaining strength. "This isn't about rules. This isn't about community standards. This is about one woman's obsession with control. And I refused to let her do it to anyone else." I felt tears burn in my own eyes. The neighbors had found their voices, and nothing Karen could say would drown them out. When Karen herself was called to the stand, she tried her old tricks, deflecting, smirking, spinning every accusation into a personal attack against her. At one point, when asked about the fraudulent neighborhood integrity council she tried to form, she snapped, "Someone has to keep order. Without rules, communities collapse." The judge leaned forward, her expression sharp. "Ms. Miller, there is a difference between order and tyranny. And from what I've heard today, you do not seem to know it." That line hung in the air like a bell tolling Karen's doom. By the end of the day, it was clear. Karen's appeal was crumbling. The evidence was stacked against her, and more importantly, the people she had silenced for years were finally speaking. The judge recessed until the following week for a formal ruling, but I could see it in Karen's face as she left the courtroom. The smugness had cracked. For the first time, she looked uncertain, almost small. Still, I didn't allow myself to celebrate yet. Karen was like a cornered animal, dangerous, unpredictable. If she couldn't win in court, she might try something else, and I had to be ready. That evening, as the neighbors gathered under the pecan tree once again, we didn't just talk about Karen, we talked about us. About cookouts and garage sales, about fixing up the community park, about planning a neighborhood Thanksgiving dinner. Karen had tried to break us apart, but in the end, she had done the opposite. She had forged us into something stronger than any HOA rulebook, a family. Still, as I sat on my porch that night, I couldn't shake the image of Karen's face as the judge chastised her, the rage simmering beneath her skin, the way she clutched her purse strap like a weapon. This wasn't over yet, not until the gavel struck and the final ruling was made. And knowing Karen, she'd try one last move before the end. Viewers, let me ask you, have you ever seen someone twist the truth so convincingly that others almost believe them? Do you think people like Karen truly believe their own lies? Or do they just cling to them because it's all they have left? If you were Elaine, would you have had the courage to stand up in court and tell the truth? If you're caught up in this battle, please like this video, share it with a friend who loves justice stories, and subscribe to HOA Stories. Every click helps keep these stories alive, and trust me, you don't want to miss the finale that's coming. The week between the hearing and the judge's final ruling felt like the longest of my life. Every hour ticked by with the weight of uncertainty pressing against my chest. Neighbors would call, stop by, even slip notes under my door. Do you think we've won? Do you think she's finished? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe the battle was already over. But deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't the kind of person who went quietly. The night before the final ruling, I sat in my living room with Daniel, going over documents one last time. My dining table looked more like a lawyer's office, stacks of papers, highlighted bylaws, receipts, sworn testimonies from neighbors, even photographs of the violations Karen had weaponized against us. Daniel set his pen down. We're ready. There's nothing she can do now. The judge saw through her game. I nodded, but my heart wasn't convinced. Karen doesn't give up. She doesn't know how. As if on cue, headlights flashed outside my window. A car idled for a moment, then sped off down the street. It wasn't the first time that week. Karen's people or Karen herself were watching. And then came the morning of the ruling. The courthouse buzzed with tension. Neighbors filled the benches, whispering, clutching each other's hands. Even the bailiff seemed to sense the weight of what was about to unfold. Then Karen walked in. But this time, she wasn't flanked by lawyers. She wasn't armed with thick binders of fabricated evidence. She strode in alone, her heels clacking against the floor like a drumbeat. And in her hand, God help me, was a thick manila folder. She didn't sit with her counsel. She didn't acknowledge anyone. Instead, she marched straight to the clerk's desk and demanded to submit new evidence. The judge raised an eyebrow. Miss Miller, proceedings are closed. You cannot submit additional evidence at this stage. Karen's voice rang out across the room. This is not new evidence. This is proof of a conspiracy. Proof that my neighbors have colluded to slander me, harass me, and strip me of my rightful authority. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My throat went dry. The judge sighed, clearly exasperated. Bring it here. Karen handed over the folder with a triumphant smile. The judge flipped it open, skimming the first few pages. Her brow furrowed. And then her lips curved into something I never expected. A smirk. Ms. Miller, the judge said, these are Facebook printouts, copies of neighborhood group chats. And from what I can tell, these are not conspiracies. These are your neighbors organizing potlucks, community cleanups, and holiday events. None of this supports your claim. Karen's face went pale. The judge continued. In fact, much of this material reflects poorly on you. Here, she held up a page, this is a message you sent threatening to fine a resident, $200 for leaving a pumpkin on their porch past November 1st. And another where you tell a neighbor their American flag disrupts visual harmony. Do you deny writing these? Karen stammered. That's taken out of context. They've been doctoring screenshots. The judge cut her off. Enough. This court has seen more than enough. The gavel came down. In light of the overwhelming testimony, documentation, and evidence, it is the ruling of this court that Ms. Karen Miller's appeal is denied. Furthermore, her actions have been deemed fraudulent and malicious. She is hereby removed from her position as HOA president, fined $50,000 for misuse of community funds, and barred from holding any leadership role in a homeowners association for life. The room erupted. Cheers, tears, even applause. Elaine clutched my arm so tightly I thought it might bruise. Neighbors who had lived in fear for years suddenly found their voices again, chanting words I never thought I'd hear. She's gone! She's gone! And Karen? She stood frozen, her face drained of color, her hands gripping the back of a chair until her knuckles turned white. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked powerless. As the bailiffs escorted her out, she turned back toward us, her eyes narrowing into slits. Her voice dropped to a hiss. You think you've won, but you'll regret this, all of you. It wasn't the scream of a tyrant. It wasn't the roar of someone in control. It was the whisper of a ghost, clinging to a throne already burned to ash. And just like that, she was gone. That night, the neighborhood threw a celebration under the pecan tree. Lanterns lit up the yard, music played, and children darted around with sparklers. Elaine stood proudly by her roses, tears streaming down her cheeks as she accepted hugs and congratulations. Daniel handed me a plate of barbecue and laughed. Well, my friend, you just survived the HOA apocalypse. How does it feel? I smiled for the first time in months. Like freedom, like I can finally breathe again. But deep down, even amid the joy, I couldn't shake the echo of Karen's last words. You'll regret this. Was it an empty threat? Or a promise of one final storm? Time would tell. Viewers, let me ask you. Do you think Karen's removal will finally bring peace to this neighborhood? Or do people like her always find a way back into power? If you had been in that courtroom, would you have cheered or felt pity for her downfall? Have you ever seen someone so blinded by control that they destroy everything they touch? If this chapter gripped you, please like this video, share it with someone who loves justice, and subscribe to HOA Stories. Your support keeps these battles for truth alive. For a few glorious weeks, peace returned to our little neighborhood. The roses on Elaine's porch bloomed unbothered, kids rode bikes down the street without fear of a citation, and for the first time in years, neighbors greeted each other without looking over their shoulders. The HOA board, once a weapon in Karen's grip, was restructured. Daniel was elected interim president, and his first act was simple: transparency. Meetings were open, minutes were published, and every fine required a clear, fair vote. It was as if light had finally poured into a room that had been locked in darkness. I should have been happy. I should have been relieved. But Karen's last words haunted me. You'll regret this. All of you. And soon, little cracks began to appear. It started small. Elaine came to me one evening, pale and shaken. Someone left a note in my mailbox, she whispered, holding out the crumpled slip of paper. The message was scrawled in jagged handwriting. Traitors pay. No signature, no explanation, just those two words. I tried to reassure her. It's probably nothing. Kids, maybe. But Elaine shook her head. This isn't kids. This feels like Karen. I wanted to dismiss it, but deep down, I felt the same chill. Over the next few weeks, reports trickled in from neighbors. A shadowy figure seen walking late at night. Headlights idling at the corner, then vanishing. Garbage cans knocked over in the dead of night. And then came the roses. Elaine woke one morning to find her prized rose bushes, those same roses Karen had once tried to ban, slashed and shredded. Petals littered the lawn like fallen blood. She sobbed in my arms. She's back. I know it's her. Daniel insisted we call the police, but without proof, they could do little more than file a report. That's when I started checking my locks twice a night. Just as the neighborhood began to heal, envelopes arrived in our mailboxes. Thick, official envelopes. My stomach dropped the moment I saw the sender. Karen Miller. She was suing us. Not just me, not just Daniel, the entire neighborhood. Her claim? Defamation. She alleged that our testimonies in court, the meetings we held, even the group texts we shared, all of it amounted to a smear campaign designed to ruin her reputation. And she wanted damages. Millions in damages. Neighbors panicked. Phone calls lit up the evening. Voices cracked with fear. She can't do this, right? She's banned from the HOA. How is this legal? I can't afford a lawsuit. I'll lose my house. I turned to Daniel, desperate. We beat her once. We can beat her again, can't we? He sighed. This isn't about winning. This is about draining us. She knows most people can't afford to fight a lawsuit this big. This is her revenge. At the next board meeting, the turnout was the largest I'd ever seen. Dozens of neighbors crowded into the clubhouse, their faces tight with worry. Daniel stood at the podium. We're in this together. We'll pool our resources, hire a defense attorney, and fight this as a united front. Karen wants to divide us, but we won't let her. A cheer rose up, shaky but determined. For the first time since the lawsuit, hope flickered. But that night, as I walked home, I noticed something taped to my front door. A single sheet of paper. Drop the case or lose everything. My knees nearly gave out. My hands trembled as I pulled the paper free. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war. The first hearing for the lawsuit was unlike anything I'd experienced. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, no longer the polished, commanding figure she once was. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes ill-fitting, but her eyes burned with something fiercer than before. She stared at each of us, one by one, as if carving our names into her memory. When the judge asked her to present her case, she launched into a tirade. They ruined me. They stole my position, my authority, my dignity. They spread lies about me online, in public, everywhere. I was the only one holding this community together, and they destroyed me. Her voice cracked into a sob, but her fists clenched tight. The judge remained calm. Ms. Miller, you must provide evidence of defamation. Do you have proof? Karen slammed a binder onto the table. Inside were hundreds of pages, screenshots of neighborhood group chats, flyers from the celebration we'd held after her removal, even photos of my house with the words "Victory Party" scrawled across them. She thinks this is proof? Daniel whispered to me. But I wasn't laughing, because while none of it was illegal, Karen's obsession was terrifyingly clear. This wasn't about money. This was personal. Weeks dragged on as the lawsuit wound through the system. Some neighbors stood strong, showing up to every meeting, pooling resources for the defense. But others began to crack under the pressure. One family quietly listed their home for sale, unwilling to risk financial ruin. Another couple refused to join the defense fund, muttering that it wasn't worth it. And that was exactly what Karen wanted. Divide, conquer, destroy from within. One night, I sat alone on my porch, staring at the quiet street. Lanterns glowed softly in windows, children's bikes leaned against fences, and for a moment, the neighborhood looked peaceful. But inside me, doubt gnawed. Had we made a mistake? By fighting Karen so publicly, by humiliating her in court, had we lit a fire that would never burn out? I thought of Elaine's roses, of the threatening notes, of the lawsuit draining our savings. Was this the price of justice? Or had we underestimated just how far a person like Karen would go? Viewers, let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you stand and fight Karen's new lawsuit, or cut your losses and move away? Do you believe justice can truly stop someone obsessed with power and revenge? Have you ever seen a person fall so low, yet still claw for control no matter the cost? If this story keeps you hooked, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to HOA Stories. Every click helps shine a light on battles just like this. The days stretched longer than ever. Karen's lawsuit wasn't just a nuisance anymore, it was a siege. Every knock at the door, every mail carrier delivering thick envelopes made my heart race. The neighbors were on edge too, their once lively chatter replaced by quiet whispers and worried glances. It felt like the dark days were returning, only heavier this time. Elaine came over one evening, clutching a small binder. "They served me today," she said quietly, her hands trembling. "Karen's lawyers want testimony from anyone who was at the celebration. She's trying to tie us all together." I took the binder, flipping through pages filled with affidavits, emails, and printed screenshots. Karen had meticulously documented everything from the moment she lost control, attempting to frame every act of community unity as harassment. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms folded. "She's desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous." We spent the next few days preparing. Neighbors pooled together, meeting in my garage to strategize. Every email was copied, every photo logged, every note cataloged. We couldn't leave anything to chance. This wasn't just about protecting our homes, it was about protecting our sanity, our dignity, and the community we had fought so hard to rebuild. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse was packed beyond capacity. It felt like every person who had ever lived in fear of Karen had shown up to witness the final act. Karen arrived with her usual flair, sunglasses concealing her eyes, but her shoulders were tense, her steps slightly uneven. She carried folders bulging with evidence, her last hope to dominate the narrative. The proceedings began, and Karen launched into a tirade. She tried to paint herself as the victim again, describing herself as the only person trying to maintain order while we allegedly conspired against her. She spoke with a venom that sent shivers down my spine, each sentence dripping with entitlement and rage. Daniel stood, presenting our meticulously organized defense. Every lie Karen had tried to weave was countered with evidence, photos, receipts, testimonies, and even public records. Each point she raised was methodically dismantled in front of the judge. Elaine and a handful of neighbors took the stand, their voices strong despite the nerves. They described Karen's obsession with control, the constant threats, and the psychological toll it had taken. Each story painted a picture of manipulation and fear, making it impossible for the court to view her as a victim. Then came the moment that would finally tilt the scales. I held up a folder of Karen's own emails, messages to neighbors threatening fines, complaints to authorities based on fabricated rules, and even a plan she had drafted to infiltrate other HOA boards with her so-called Neighborhood Integrity Council. The judge leaned forward, examining each page carefully. Karen tried to interject, claiming the documents were fabricated. But Daniel had anticipated that and produced the original timestamps and server records, proving authenticity. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every eye was on Karen as the evidence stacked against her like bricks in a wall. Her face, once confident, now displayed panic. The smug arrogance she had worn like armor was gone. For the first time, Karen's power seemed to crumble. Her threats felt hollow, her strategies ineffective. We were no longer victims. We were a united front, armed with truth and courage. When the judge finally spoke, the room held its collective breath. The court finds in favor of the defendants. Karen Miller's claims are dismissed in their entirety. Furthermore, this court finds evidence of malicious intent and abuse of HOA authority. Ms. Miller is hereby barred from pursuing any further litigation against these individuals related to the HOA or its residents. Any future legal attempts by Ms. Miller regarding this matter will be considered frivolous and subject to sanctions. The gavel came down, echoing like a hammer striking iron. Relief crashed over me like a tidal wave. The neighbors erupted in cheers, hugs, and tears. Elaine collapsed into my arms, sobbing with relief. "It's finally over," she whispered. Karen stood frozen, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had one last look around the room, her eyes scanning every neighbor she had tried to intimidate. The weight of the ruling hit her like a tidal wave, stripping away the last remnants of control she thought she possessed. As the bailiffs escorted her out, she glared one final time, but it wasn't the glare of authority, it was the glare of defeat, powerless and exposed. For the first time in years, she was completely, utterly helpless. That evening, the neighborhood gathered under the pecan tree once again. Lanterns swayed in the breeze, children ran with sparklers, and laughter filled the air. The roses bloomed in Elaine's yard untouched, symbols of resilience and victory. Daniel raised his glass. We did it. Together. I smiled, watching the street come alive with life again. Karen had tried to divide us, to break us, to terrify us into submission. But unity, truth, and persistence had won. As I closed my eyes that night on the porch, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Karen's shadow had finally lifted. Viewers, let me ask you, have you ever faced someone who refused to accept defeat even after being proven wrong? If you were in our neighborhood, would you have stood up or let fear control your actions? What steps do you take in your own community to protect your home and neighbors from bullies? If this chapter inspired you, like this video, share it with someone who loves HOA revenge stories, and subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales of justice served in suburban neighborhoods. The first week after Karen's final legal defeat felt surreal. It was as though the neighborhood itself exhaled a long-held breath. Doors that had been shut tight now swung open. Lawns once trimmed to satisfy her impossible standards grew wild in the sunlight, free from scrutiny. Kids' laughter returned to the streets, not punctuated by the fear of fines or citations. Neighbors greeted each other with genuine smiles, no longer wary of what Karen might do next. Even the older couples, who had been hesitant to get involved, now waved proudly, their confidence restored. The sense of community that had been nearly destroyed was rebuilding itself brick by brick. I walked past Elaine's house, and she waved me over. Her roses were in full bloom, vibrant and resilient, a reminder of what had survived the storm. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" she said, her voice soft but firm. "They remind us that life goes on even after someone like her tries to ruin it." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. The roses weren't just flowers, they were symbols of our persistence, our courage, and our refusal to be bullied. Daniel organized a neighborhood meeting in the community hall. It wasn't about bylaws or fines, it was about celebration. The agenda included potlucks, a street cleanup, and plans for a small playground renovation. Everyone had a voice, and everyone was listened to. Decisions were transparent, fair, and most importantly, free from intimidation. During the meeting, I realized something important. Karen's obsession had inadvertently united us. The neighbors who had once avoided confrontation now stood together, ready to protect what was theirs. They had found their power not through legal threats or HOA authority, but through community, solidarity, and resilience. At one point, a young mother raised her hand. "I was scared to speak up before," she admitted, "but now I feel like we can take on anything." Karen thought she could divide us, but she only made us stronger. Applause filled the room. I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. Our shared struggle had forged bonds deeper than any HOA regulation ever could. As the weeks passed, Karen became little more than a rumor, a cautionary tale whispered among new neighbors. Some would bring up her name, usually with a shake of the head. "Remember when she tried to control everything?" someone would say. And we'd nod, smiling, knowing we had survived and thrived despite her. I often reflected on the journey, from the first letter she sent 37 violations in a single month to the courtroom showdowns and the late-night meetings of terrified neighbors. The story of our fight wasn't just about defeating a tyrant, it was about reclaiming our homes, our peace, and our dignity. We even started a small neighborhood watch newsletter, not for rules or fines, but to celebrate victories, highlight neighbors helping neighbors, and ensure that everyone felt seen and safe. It was ironic, almost poetic. Karen had tried to suffocate us with rules, and in her absence, we breathed new life into the community. One evening, as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the street, I realized the most valuable lessons weren't legal strategies or court victories. They were about courage, unity, and the quiet power of people standing together. Karen's shadow might linger in memory, but it no longer had power over us. We had turned fear into strength, threats into lessons, and tyranny into a story of justice for everyone who lived here. The roses swayed gently in the evening breeze. I smiled, thinking about the journey and all the neighbors who had stood together. Karen had tried to break us, but in the end, she had only revealed what we were capable of. Viewers, let me ask you, have you ever seen a neighborhood or community come together against a common challenge? How would you react if someone tried to control your home or community unfairly? What lessons can you take from our story to protect your own home and neighbors? If this story inspired you, like this video, share it with friends who love HOA revenge stories, and subscribe to HOA Stories. Every click helps keep these tales of justice alive. The neighborhood had begun to settle into a rhythm I hadn't dared imagine when Karen's tyranny first took hold. Mornings were quiet but alive with possibility. Mailboxes no longer held threats. Lawns bloomed in wild freedom, and children's laughter echoed without the tension of fear. It was a rhythm born of victory, but also of vigilance. The HOA meetings, once dry and tense, had transformed into community gatherings. People shared updates, plans for small improvements, and stories of everyday kindness. There was still talk of Karen, whispered like a ghost story, but the tone was different now. It was cautionary, not fearful. One evening I walked down the street, taking note of the little things. Mr. Alvarez had painted his mailbox in bright colors, something Karen would have fined him for. Mrs. Jenkins had finally planted the tulips she'd wanted for years, no approval required. Even the community garden had doubled in size, neighbors working together, laughing together, celebrating small victories that had once seemed impossible. Elaine came out onto our porch and waved. Her roses were thriving. "They survived everything she threw at us," she said, smiling. "Just like us." I nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction. Karen had tried to strip away dignity, trust, and joy. But the truth was simple. Fear can't hold up against unity, and control can't survive in a community that cares for one another. The last reminder of Karen came in the form of a letter, a thin envelope delivered by mail. I tore it open cautiously, half expecting threats, legal jargon, or her familiar brand of venom. Instead, it was empty, literally blank, save for a faint handwritten note at the bottom. "You won this time, don't forget it." I stared at it, a mix of relief and amusement washing over me. She was gone in action but persistent in memory, a reminder of what had been and what we had overcome. Neighbors started sharing their own stories more openly now. One by one, they recounted small victories, subtle acts of courage, and moments where standing together had made all the difference. The narrative of fear had transformed into one of resilience. Daniel, ever the organizer, suggested a neighborhood picnic to commemorate the victory. The idea spread like wildfire. Families brought food, children played games, and laughter filled spaces that had once been filled with whispers and anxiety. It was a healing process, slow but profound. I sat on my porch that evening, watching lanterns sway gently in the breeze, listening to the soft hum of neighbors enjoying one another's company. The roses glowed in the fading sunlight. I realized that the greatest victory wasn't legal. It wasn't the fines overturned, the appeals denied, or the lawsuits dismissed. It was the return of trust, the reclaiming of a community's spirit, the quiet triumph of ordinary people refusing to be bullied. And as I looked down the street, I felt a deep gratitude for the ordinary heroes who had stood beside me: Elaine, with her unwavering courage, Daniel with his strategy and calm, and every neighbor who had dared to speak the truth. Together, we had dismantled tyranny and built something better in its place. The neighborhood was no longer defined by fear but by resilience, by laughter, by roses, by children, by voices that refused to be silenced. Karen's shadow lingered only as a memory, a story we could tell to teach others what courage and unity could accomplish. Viewers, let me ask you, have you ever experienced a victory over someone who tried to control you unfairly? What small acts in your community helped create a sense of safety and unity? How would you react if a bully returned to try to reclaim power after being defeated? If this chapter inspired you, like this video, share it with friends who enjoy HOA revenge stories, and subscribe to HOA Stories to follow more tales of justice and community triumph. The morning of the final community gathering dawned bright and clear, as if the universe itself had decided to celebrate our triumph. The streets were alive with activity: neighbors setting up tables, children running ahead to stake out spots for games, the smell of fresh-baked pies and coffee drifting through the air. For the first time in years, our neighborhood felt safe, whole, and free. Karen was no longer an official presence in our lives. Her legal attempts had been thoroughly dismissed, and the sanctions imposed ensured she could never reclaim authority in any HOA. Yet, despite her absence, there was a lingering sense of unease. Old habits die hard, and some of us couldn't help glancing over our shoulders, expecting another threat, another surprise, another attack. I walked down the street, taking in the vibrant energy. Children laughed, neighbors greeted each other warmly, and the community garden was thriving. Every rose, every tulip, every leaf seemed to celebrate the freedom we had fought for. Elaine joined me, holding a small bouquet of her best roses. "Can you believe it?" she said softly. "We survived everything. She tried to crush us, and yet here we are, stronger than ever." I nodded, letting the warmth of the moment wash over me. "We didn't just survive, Elaine, we won. Not because the courts ruled in our favor, but because we never let fear rule our lives." Daniel approached, clipboard in hand, his usual calm demeanor radiating reassurance. "I think this calls for one final celebration," he said, gesturing toward the picnic tables lined with food, decorations, and the smiling faces of neighbors. "A moment to honor our resilience and the lessons we've learned." As we gathered, I realized something profound. Karen's tyranny had forced us to see our own strength, our capacity for courage, and the power of unity. Each neighbor's story was a testament to resilience. Elaine's roses were more than flowers. They were symbols of defiance and endurance. The children running freely were living proof that fear could be overcome. During the event, several neighbors shared their experiences of Karen's harassment, recounting the absurd fines, the invasive rules, and the emotional toll it had taken. Yet, rather than dwelling on fear or resentment, they spoke of perseverance, cooperation, and eventual triumph. It was cathartic, a communal healing that no legal judgment alone could achieve. I thought back to the 37 violation letters, each one a dagger disguised as a rule. Karen had wielded them with precision, aiming to intimidate, divide, and dominate. And yet all that power she had tried to impose was meaningless in the face of a united community. The judge's rulings, the court transcripts, and the legal sanctions were satisfying, certainly. But the true victory lay in reclaiming our streets, our gardens, our homes, and our peace of mind. The neighborhood had become more than just houses lined up on a street. It had become a family, bound by shared struggle and mutual respect. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting golden light across the scene, I noticed something extraordinary. The roses in Elaine's yard seemed to glow in the fading light, their petals vibrant and unbroken. The children's laughter echoed through the street, mingling with the gentle hum of neighbors chatting, planning, and celebrating. For the first time, I felt completely at peace. Karen's legacy had been one of control and fear, but our legacy was entirely different. We had proven that authority without empathy could never withstand unity and courage. Every smile, every handshake, every laugh ringing down the street was a victory over tyranny. Later that evening, as the last of the lanterns flickered and neighbors slowly made their way home, I sat on my porch gazing at the quiet street. There was a sense of completion, a quiet triumph that words could hardly capture. Karen had been defeated not just in court, but in spirit. Her obsession with power had crumbled, leaving a community stronger, closer, and more resilient than ever before. I thought about the future. There would be new neighbors, new challenges, and inevitable disagreements, but nothing would shake the foundation we had rebuilt. The lessons of vigilance, unity, and moral courage would remain, guiding us in the years to come. And for Karen, the gavel had fallen, the legal doors closed, and the community had moved on. She was a chapter in our history, a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked control and obsession. Her threats, her fines, and her manipulations were all behind us. What remained was victory, resilience, and the unshakable knowledge that ordinary people, when united, could triumph over extraordinary intimidation. Viewers, let me ask you, have you ever faced a challenge where standing together with your community made all the difference? What lessons about courage and unity can you take from our story to apply in your own neighborhood? If someone tried to intimidate or control you unfairly, would you fight back or step aside? If this final story inspired you, like this video, share it with friends who enjoy HOA revenge stories, and subscribe to HOA Stories. Your support helps us tell more tales of justice, resilience, and underdog triumph.